Yes,
Let's get started.
perfect. Should you start with the first topic is documentation updates?
Yeah, so let's start from the top and then hopefully more people will join. So Magnus
Yep,
might be here in a few minutes or something like that. So
yep.
basically, I've been talking about the documentation several times now. And
Mm-hmm.
if you go to GitHub, there's an issue. And there's no secret that I'm trying to get more Japanese people interested in Imba.
Yeah,
So I was thinking if we change the style, it's 245. If we change the style of the documentation, we can
mm-hmm.
make it more appealing. And one thing I wanted to experiment with is having a mascot and having
Yeah,
a cute mascot, because that's something that I thought was interesting. And in Japan, you have like basically a lot of logos. If you've been to Japan and you've seen advertisements in the
mm-hmm.
subway and so on, you can see there's a lot of graphics and so on. So
Yeah,
I contacted Turarin and asked him to make me something. And we have privately had some drafts. So you've seen more proposals than what's here.
yeah,
And so basically the point with the mascot is not that this is something urgent or important. The point is that we need to, or at least I want to attract more people to the language. So I want something that's visually appealing. And if this mascot thing makes someone, when they're scrolling their dev.to feed or their Twitter feed, if that makes them interested in Imba, then I'm happy. Then I feel like, whoa, the mascot has achieved something. So it's basically to just, if you scroll up, I don't want to highlight someone or say anything bad, but if you scroll a little bit down, this guy, for example, Buslav,
yeah,
I'm assuming it's a guy, I don't know. He
yeah,
says, girls will like, but not me. And to be honest, I'm super happy if girls are going to be interested in Imba. I have 3 sisters. And
yeah.
if they were interested in Imba just because of the mascot, yeah, I think that's amazing. That's my opinion. And
Yeah,
I don't know how much you've read of the thread, but basically, if this is something we want to focus on, great. And I'm not gonna push too hard on anything. So if what Eric Tirado has proposed further down is the best,
yeah,
according to you and everybody else, then let's use that. But the point is, the documentation doesn't need to be super boring. It can be juicy. It can be redesigned, and we can have some graphics sprinkled throughout it
yeah.
and make it appealing to more people, not just people who are interested in obscure languages.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. I've read the thread. I'm not sure. I don't have a strong opinion. Uh, since I'm more used to this kind of style, I guess I like the style better, although I think I like the figure here a little better. But as we talked about earlier, this is just a sketch, and what I talked to you about was exactly that, to try to stylize it a little and make it more in sync with the logo, which I
Mm.
think this kind of style does. But again, this style is less Japanese, I guess. So it will not work as well in your uh, with your goal for the mascots, so to
Mm.
speak.
Yeah.
Um, I'm all for me. It's more like right now I'm focusing on getting version 2.0 ready. So I'm not. To me, it's not like urgent or important to get this to finalize and decide on a specific mascot and go with it immediately. But I see. Um, I definitely see the point in having one. It's a cute thing. So I don't necessarily agree with the other people here who write that they really think you shouldn't have a mascot at all. Um, so yeah.
Simon, what do you think?
I haven't read the thread, but um, I don't pay too much attention to the logos.
Mm.
Yeah.
Like that's so. If it attracts people, it's good, but I'm afraid that it doesn't matter that much
Yeah.
for the marketing.
Yeah.
I kind of agree. I don't think the mascot itself will matter that much, but I agree with Alexander that the style of the whole documentation and such will matter. Like if it's
Definitely, yeah.
fun and playful and yeah. Um,
Yeah. There's also libraries which has very nice and easy documentation to read, which makes them like, this is something I would like to go through compared to documentation, which
Yeah.
is just like, hey, download this huge PDF, or like where it's just like a bunch of text and you.
Yeah.
Yeah, please elaborate. I'm just gonna get something so I can, or actually we should update the notes before. Yeah, let me get that window up.
Yeah, maybe you can.
Yeah, I'll do that. Let's see. So and feel free to edit the document too. So let's see. I'm just gonna fix my window so I can have the documents up and the video at the same time. Yeah, that's good feedback. And as I mentioned, like this is just a small step. It's like I've been thinking about things, and some of the small things might not make sense if you don't see the picture I have in my mind. And this was just a small step in a specific direction. And I think maybe it would be good to try to talk with Eric Tirado and see what he thinks, because if he can do the rebranding of the site and the documentation, that's great. That's like less things that has to be done in the project. And it seems like he's comfortable with HTML and CSS. Maybe he could just prototype. He doesn't necessarily need to write the code for or if he doesn't have time, he could just make sketches, proposals, if he has time. And then we could use that, because I think it would be, then it's probably better if he has time, that one person does it, because then we could have it consistent. And then we could follow that brand guideline, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Let me talk to, because I tried to propose this mascot thing a while back, and I was under the impression that Eric did not have time for something like this, or he didn't know how to make a mascot. But then when I made a proposal there, then he came up with the proposal, and I think that's great. So instead of just going and do something and then getting like, it's better to just get the stuff cooked on his side if he wants to add something, and then I can go out and get the other stuff which he doesn't necessarily have time to. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I do think that Eric has designed the logo, and I think most of us are very satisfied with that. And I do think even if he doesn't have time to do a lot of additional stuff, I think he should have kind of the final say whether it comes to like the rest of the branding, or not final say, but I think we should listen to his opinion, especially since we do want the logo and the rest of the branding to make sense together. I think that's very important. So I do think we need to let him be very involved in signing off on the eventual mascot or styles in general.
Yeah, and that's totally fine, but you should have made that clear, like at least to me earlier, because it's like the same thing. If you were supposed to go through a second person making Imba V2 changes, then it puts it puts a bottleneck into the process, because then we have to wait on that. But that's totally fine. And I'm going to do that change. Like instead of trying to come up with major changes to the documentation on structure, I'll try to coordinate with Eric. I think that's a much better path based on what I've observed in the project. But I didn't know that in the beginning, because if I had known that, I would have tried to communicate more with Eric, and then I think we could have come up with something better, and maybe even earlier if he had the time.
Yeah.
But that's good to know. I think that's good to know for me at least, because I think the documentation is not good. Like, I mean, like the layout, I mean, the structure, I mean, the way you use it, how it looks and feels. I think it's really bad. So I hope that if Eric or someone else has time, it's possible to like revamp it and repolish it. So it becomes better to
specific use. I agree that things like that, there is no search, that is just basically broken. Do you think that in general, like is it the order of what we go through? Is it the examples? Is it the
just look at the right side now. You have a window basically up. If you look at the right side, there's like so much empty space. If you look at the right side, the other side.
Yeah.
You see that? There's like so much empty space there. There's no search.
Yeah, but but that's more of a larger redesign. We definitely don't want to take this section and just stretch it out. We would want to fill this with some like valuable additional information.
Yeah, you could do that.
Because having more than X number of words per line is just bad user experience for the reader. So I do agree that let's see what Vue.js does. They are essentially just adding more white space around the center thing and adding some sponsors there. But they at least have basically the same width of the main documentation part.
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about like running everything to Eric like that. I'm just talking about in general, when we design things that need to play well together with the logo, I think we should at least like listen to his feedback about it. Not that he needs to be directly involved in everything.
I think it's great to get feedback, but I also am very lenient on doing lots of experiments and just failing really fast. But if you check out the Preact website, that's the one I like. Like, it feels good on mobile, Preact.js. And if you hit something there, it's similar to what we're doing, right? But it feels good when you use it, like on the phone, on the laptop. And Simon, if you have any good examples on documentation websites you want to share, please share.
So I think the most important things here are just the content, I guess, the way it's probably logically structured into the natural sections and going through things step by step. I don't think it's like the layout itself that is much like that. This layout is much nicer than this. That I don't really buy into, but I do agree that the structure and like we need to think through what basically what we teach in the documentation, what we go through and in what order.
Yeah, I agree. That's the most important thing. But if we're gonna revamp the docs, we might as well change how it's laid out, the structure. And I'm not talking about just the content, but the layout of the.
Would you ever like consider using something like Gitbook?
I haven't used it personally, but I'm familiar with it. So if you think, or actually I have used it as a user, but not as someone who's writing documentation. yeah, if you think that's better, then why not? I don't have like, I'm not heavily invested in Imba.io. Like if we want to move away from that code base, that's like, yeah, doesn't. But I see some limitations with using Gitbook, but it's like alternatives will show up if we move away from those things.
And I actually think it is good to use not use Gitbook and use our own implementation. Also because we do want to have an open source, relatively complicated website for Imba that is written in Imba. So
yeah, so but maybe that's something we can also discuss with Eric. He's mentioned Gitbook before, and if that's something considering he's done most of the branding things, we could also move away from the existing Imba.io, just trash that and then go over to Gitbook, and it would probably be easier to maintain. And then the focus wouldn't be the layout, how it looks, how it feels. It would just be the content, like, because then Gitbook would be responsible for the look and feel, and then we would be responsible for the content. Maybe that's also easier for you, so you can go in and just write and need to focus on build issues.
Yeah.
But I was hoping maybe we don't need to do it now, but Simon, if you have any good examples of documentation websites you enjoy reading, please send them to me privately, or you could also just add them to the document.
I think he's muted his microphone.
Did I mute him?
No, I muted myself here just not to noise out. Well, I read like so there's like this book on Elm, which is like public. It's called like elmprogramming.com, and it has been very like easy to read. But that one doesn't either have a search, but it's more like, hey, this is when you want to learn to program in Elm, start reading here, and then you just read it chapter by chapter.
Yeah. But this feels nice. Like it looks nice. Yeah, nice. I'll check it out. It's cool. Thanks.
But so that one isn't either a documentation. It's more like get started and understand Elm.
Yeah. And I think we should, we discussed that, Alexander, and I think you were more interested in going away from kind of guides and more like raw documentation. I do think, especially with Imba 2.0, which is closer to ES6 and where the tag concepts are just in line with web components, I do think that I don't see a documentation where you really need to search a lot, but I might be wrong.
Yeah, I think you're wrong, because one thing I've started working on this weekend was generating a docset file from the imba.io website. I'll probably rewrite the code I have locally to something else. Instead of using imba.io, I'll probably just use the Imba project. The point is then have you used Dash?
No.
So basically Dash is like this offline documentation browser.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, so I use that every day and I use it heavily. I search for functions, stuff, and so I was imagining you would use imba.io the same way. You would search for a function and you would get a direct hit and then you would read up on it.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
It makes sense, but it depends like how many. It makes sense when you work with a big API or a big library, but in Imba there aren't really that many functions even to like that. We'll get back to that, but with Imba 2.0 we get rid of custom imba.event, so there are just plain events like actual JS events. There are just JS DOM elements that are sprinkled with Imba magic. and there are much fewer actual methods exposed by the runtime or library.
Yeah, but imagine you're coming from some JavaScript framework. You haven't seen Ruby in your life. And then you see this unless keyword and you're curious, what does that mean? And then you read up on it from the documentation, and then you forget it after a few days. And then you say, oh, I remember this unless keyword. I just want an example of it. Show me an example. And if you could just search for unless, you see several hits, and then you don't want to read about it. You just want to see an example, just to reason about it.
Yeah.
That's not Imba specific. That's just the language, keywords in the language. So
yeah, I agree that it should be easily available. And I'm obviously not saying that we shouldn't have search. So I guess we can probably, we shouldn't spend too much time discussing that. I obviously agree that search is better than no search. So
yeah, Eric is here. I don't know when he arrived, but probably fairly recently.
I can see him, but.
So do you want to talk more about the documentation stuff or jump straight to Imba V2?
For me, I think we can do a just lightning walkthrough of the current state of Imba V2.
Nice.
That's fine for you guys?
That's fine for me.
So I've been working for some time on version 2 now, and there are like still lots of stuff remaining or missing related to Imba 1. It is coming along nicely. It has a lot of changes, also breaking changes. So first of all, we have been through this in the previous meetup, but there are some syntax changes, like we have removed implicit calling, like calling without parentheses. And we also reworked how the instance variables work. The major other changes that we haven't discussed because they weren't really implemented the last meeting is that we moved away from, in Imba 1, the core concept is that when you create a tag, like an element in the language, it actually creates a DOM element and it creates a Imba tag instance, and it links the two up. So you have this duality everywhere with events, with the DOM, with everything, that you have DOM elements and you have their Imba tag and vice versa. So I started experimenting with trying to actually like merge the two. So you only have native real tags to work with, real DOM elements. And it's working very well. And so when you create a tag now, I can show some examples, but if you create a tag now, you essentially create a custom web component, like web component. So right now, web components is supported in every browser except Internet Explorer. There will be ways to do polyfill, things like that. But for now, I think we should just support newer browsers and Electron and be a language for the future in that sense. And so basically, custom tags in Imba will now compile down to real web components, so they can be used anywhere. And the standard library, because we removed this duality between Imba tags and DOM elements, a huge part of the standard library just is removed naturally, because we don't need all these additional helper methods that glue the two worlds together. So the standard library is now down from, I think it was 60 kilobytes or something uncompressed to around 8 or 9. And the gzip version is now a few kilobytes, like 2 kilobytes or something. So it's essentially the runtime is removed and it's just baked into the compiled output of the files. So one of the cool things with this new thing is that when you now define these custom tags in Imba and they compile down to web components, we keep the whole insanely fast declarative rendering, like the compiled declarative tags from Imba 1, but we've massively overhauled, basically rewritten the whole tag compiler. So it's much more efficient now, actually, because yeah, I could go into detail on the compiled output at a later time. It looks a lot more garbled because it's essentially like a machine code almost. But one of the cool things now is that you can actually write your an Imba tag component. You can compile it to a JavaScript file, and then anyone could essentially use it just by including this a script tag with that compile tag. And if they define a tag by that name in the actual HTML or even in React, then it will automatically just awaken as this Imba tag and render as this Imba tag. So this is a new kind of a hello world example with Imba 2.0. I just have an index file where I've defined a custom tag named hello world. And within the index, I have a hello world tag in the body. And if you then run this, it will basically create the content of the hello world and map it up to the Imba tag just automatically. So this is a very simple example, but it's now extremely easy to actually start using Imba gradually by creating intelligent complex components and just including them in your basic application, be it a React application or just a plain JS HTML application. So that is one of the core changes here. Another change is the whole, like the performance and memory use in general. This is from a private rendering benchmark written by the Vue creator to test like the Vue 3 virtual DOM, which uses some of the same ideas as Imba 1.0. And I started like digging into it and looking at the speed differences. And obviously Imba 1.0 mounted in 75 milliseconds. The average run of the rendering thing here was 4.9 milliseconds, while Vue was actually quite a lot better, mounted in around 40 milliseconds and takes 4.15 for the average run. And the vanilla implementation, which is like handcrafted by Evan as a fast implementation, mounts in 21 milliseconds and takes 2.37 milliseconds, while Imba 2.0 is actually, yeah, let me see, it mounts usually in around 25 milliseconds, and it's actually faster than the vanilla benchmark, than the vanilla implementation. And this is even when we include lifecycle stuff like mount and unmount and all that. So if you rip out all the additional fancy lifecycle stuff here, it will be even faster. But the one more interesting thing is that it even uses less memory than all the other implementation. It uses slightly more memory than the vanilla implementation. No, maybe it doesn't. Yeah, I think it might even use less, yeah. So it's basically a much faster and less memory intensive implementation of the whole tag rendering for as opposed to Imba 1.0. We also have this previous benchmark that I've been implementing Imba 2.0 for, and yeah, it's faster to mount. The whole application here is now 7 kilobytes compared to 30 in Imba 1.0. It uses less memory, it's more than twice as fast, etc. So it's going to be, yeah, good to get this out. I have published actually a pre-version of Imba 2.0, so you can install it like npm install Imba at pre. So I'm daily pushing new versions there at the pre tag. And if you want to develop with it, you can just download it and run npm run watch. It will bootstrap the whole compiler, watch the tests, watch the all the compiler code, so you can develop and run tests, and yeah, it's a much more pleasant development experience as well for people who would like to start contributing to the language itself. We also made sure that no compiled JavaScript code is included in the repo now. So the actual commits will look more cleaner now, since we don't include all this extraneous compiled code in the repository itself. Yeah. So there are tons. I think I want to wait until Magnus has joined for the next meeting, I guess, to go through the more compiled output. Also because I want him to join in and try to optimize the tag fragment implementation, because he was the one who implemented the actual reconciler in the DOM reconciler in Imba 1. Yeah.
Nice. That's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
I like the web components part, because then you can start using Imba in legacy code bases. Like we've talked about it before several times, but like imagine you're stuck in Angular 1.4 or 1.6 and you have to write Angular code. You can't just rewrite everything. There's just too much code, and now you can actually use Imba there if you wanted to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very cool, and also it works with, obviously works with SFC stuff. So you could here also like CSS scoped, see color red. I guess I'm not sure if I'm running this building this right now, but I think I might be. Yeah. So everything, even if you include that single file in some weird other project, then all the styled elements inside of this specific component will be styled according to the styles you define here. So it will be an extremely efficient and cool way to create standalone components for use in projects everywhere.
Nice.
Yeah.
So did you get a chance to look at Svelte for the benchmarking of this rendering thing?
I haven't done that yet, but let me see. I think public. I do think that Evan has created a Svelte public. Was that it? Public index. Thought that should work, but this is not found. Okay, it's
just the path.
Yeah. So I don't know how efficient that implementation is, since I haven't really looked at it. But again, it's almost 3 times slower than Imba. And what's most baffling about it is that from the 1.5 milliseconds this takes, almost all of the time is spent in the actual DOM, like in the actual methods that set class names and does things in the browser. So the point I'm trying to make is that the overhead of Imba is basically a few % of the overhead of most of the other frameworks here. And that becomes especially apparent if you start trying to profile like rendering, as I talked about in the original benchmark I created, where the whole point is that it should also be fast in rendering when there are no changes, essentially. And there, Imba 2 is, I think it's like at least 5 times faster than even Imba 1, because it creates 0 garbage in a basic rendering of an application. So you could essentially render 1,000 times. And let me see, this is a tangent, but it's actually interesting to look at. If I try here to API profile, run 100,000 iterations without any changes in Imba 1, and do the same thing in Imba 2. So here you see that it's basically 4 or 5 times faster. But what's also interesting is that if you see the chart, you can see the complexity. This is kind of a proxy for the complexity, like the depth of the functions that are being called, etc., to do this DOM reconciliation. Even compared to Imba 1, it's so much faster. And the reason is that if we look at the output of Imba 1 compared to Imba 2, let me see if I can find the actual so this is the rendering of the application in Imba 1. You see that there's a lot of nested things, set content. It's creating some arrays with content in every render, etc. Same with the to-do thing. Although one benefit of this is that it is still quite readable. But if you look at the Imba 2 point, the 2 thing, then it's obviously not readable at all. So this is the rendering in Imba 2. It has no closures, like even the for loops are unwrapped up into the top level statement. And it's essentially just a state machine walking through the changes and setting some, yeah. So the benefit of that is you can see that in the flame chart here. And if you compare it to something like React, it's just ridiculous. I can't run 100,000 cycles there because it will literally take minutes. But if I run 1,000 cycles with React, you can start like to see the complexity there. So maybe I was wrong when I said that it will take literally minutes, but 10,000 will take, yeah, 5 minutes. No, 5 seconds, while with Imba 2, it will take 12 milliseconds. And again, if you want to see the heavy, so what is it that takes the most time here? Basically, there are just tons and tons of things happening in React. But you see that the garbage collector itself spends 100 milliseconds here in this benchmark. But if you look at the runs in Imba 2 and in Imba 1, you will see that I think the garbage collector spends like, yeah, 22 milliseconds. The garbage collector doesn't spend any time in Imba 2 because there aren't any garbage to collect. You will see that this actually reuses arrays and does all these kinds of clever optimizations to make sure the render loop is as cheap and efficient as possible.
That's really cool. But if we think about the release plan, like, so do you want us to start using this today and then give feedback, and then after a few weeks or 1 week or whatever, then it's going to be released?
So the official 2.0 non-beta release won't be for a few more weeks at least, because there are still quite a few concepts that are still not up to par compared to Imba 1. That's just, so there are tons of things that are not supported in loops right now. If you return multiple types of elements in a loop, there are strange things like that. But I'm working through these things. You can definitely try it immediately. It will probably be quite broken a few times a day, but you can try it again, and I'm going to push new versions every day. I should write in the README like how you can actually add your own tests and examples to run them easily, because it's quite easy now. If you download the Imba repo, like on the 2.0 branch, and you in your terminal, if you write npm run watch, you can even like in test/apps, you can just add your own files there. Like you don't even need to create any tests. You create a random Imba file, and immediately that will be available. Let me see. Let me run the tests here. It will be included when you run the tests, and it will be accessible on the raw URL to the index.html, test/index.html. Then you can just look through the different examples and switch to an example and try them. So it's a nice way to develop and experiment with the language. So yeah.
Cool. So
I think that's it for now.
Do you think you can document this before Friday?
Yeah, I can do that.
Nice.
That's cool. That also opens up for like you can submit like, hey, I have some issues with my web component which looks like this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's basically just we didn't have a good test suite for Imba 1 in regards to tags and actual like live documents and how mounting works and bugs with event binding. And so this new test system is much better for, that's actually how I develop things now. I create, it's basically test-driven development, even though I'm not usually a fan of that. So I create failing tests and I just make them work. And the plan is to have these applications in the test folder be a good introduction to the language and the features as well. So the tests themselves shouldn't be too obscure and too much code, so that people can read through the examples and play with them and actually get something out of it.
Yeah, I also like TDD. It's or you said you don't like it, but I enjoy it because you can start out with the failing test, and that's basically how I've tried to fix stuff in Imba. Or at least the stuff I've fixed. So you have a failing test, but how different is it from the Imba 1 test suite? Is anything going to be preserved, or is everything gone?
Eventually, I do want to make or most of the original syntax tests work as well. But right now, the test is, if you do npm run test, it only runs the tests in application. And it also only runs them in headless Chrome now with Puppeteer. But that's temporary. So yeah.
Cool.
That's, yeah. I don't think I have anything more right now. But I think for the next meeting, there will be a lot more progress. And hopefully we can release 2.0 before like early December. That's my goal. At least have a solid actual 2.0 out before Christmas and do a lot of testing between now and then.
Yeah, that's good. I just wanted to follow up some more. Like, if we look at web components, like, have you thought about the downsides of using web components? Like, is there anything for like the Shadow DOM? Is there any issues with that?
So right now we're not using the Shadow DOM. We could, if we wanted to, we could turn on the use of Shadow DOM for specific nodes. But yeah, I think there are a lot of problems with Shadow DOM. It's not, especially when it comes to styling and stuff, it's easier to do the SFC styling approach that we do, the same as Vue SFC. And then you don't really need to use Shadow DOM and scoped CSS and all these fancy things. So currently we are using web components, but we are not using Shadow DOM.
Okay, so, but did you try to use the Shadow DOM at all?
Yeah, I looked into it. It's easy for us to optionally use it for specific components if we want to, but it's just not worth it right now, I think.
Yeah, I was just curious, just to see.
Yeah.
Great. I look forward to trying out Imba 2. This is going to be lots of fun.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the removal of implicit self, I think we should discuss that the next time and make sure Magnus is here as well. We already talked about it, Alexandra, and I think we agree that we should remove it, but it also implies we need to figure out some consequences of removing it. So.
I've heard so much about it. Like, I think it's good to talk with Magnus because like I don't have really anything to add to that discussion. And so let's do the follow-up and then just wrap up.
Yeah.
I need to fix
you want to take over or?
No, it's fine. You could just scroll up. But can you check the chat while I'm fixing the font?
The Gitter chat?
No, the chat on Zoom. Let's see.
Zoom.
Heading 3.
How do I see the chat while I am?
Which font is this? Oh yeah, you probably can't see it. Yeah, so Eric is asking about the Imba DOM, memo as DOM in Spectrum. So if you go to Spectrum, let's just look at that. So chat.
I do. I agree with that we should call it memo DOM instead. Do you agree?
It sounds good to me. I don't have any memo DOM. Yeah, it's shorter. Sounds good.
I actually can't see Eric in the participants list, but
he is there. I think. Eric, are you there?
Yeah. Anyway, I agree. We should call it memo DOM instead. Memoized is hard to spell, and most people don't even know about the term. So, but I do think for the real public launch of Imba 2.0, I do think we should create another blog post like the one I did before about the benchmark, and actually like do a much more thorough walkthrough of this benchmark and the results and why it really does matter. We should obviously do a lot of other things as well, but I think it is important to get out the how fast Imba is in real world applications. And we should obviously also add Imba to all the other well-known benchmarks, because now I'm confident that even for the benchmarks that don't really test DOM reconciliation, that basically just tests a bunch of DOM mutations in the browser, like JS frameworks benchmark, then Imba 2 will almost certainly be the fastest of all the implementations. And the least memory intensive. So
I think Simon, are you going to leave soon? Just I wanted to ask. Okay, so quick. Do you have time before the 2 weeks to do a screencast with me? We sit down and then we write some Imba code together.
Are you asking me or?
I'm asking Simon.
Okay.
I think it could be very fun.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I'll note that down as a follow-up. Maybe we can even use Imba 2. Is that possible on Scrimba now, or is it?
It's not possible now, but my goal is to make that possible within a week. So.
Imba 2 in a screencast. Yeah, cool. So yeah. And let's take the other follow-up quickly.
I think I'll have to leave for work at 8.
Yeah.
So
I need to leave soon as well. So it was nice chatting with you.
Yeah, nice chatting to Simon. Have a great day if you leave soon. So we say next. Yeah. So the document how to write the test. You're following up on that, Sindre.
Yeah.
And then we have the documentation coordination. So Eric, you weren't there in the beginning, but we talked about the documentation, and essentially what we agreed to was to try to coordinate things better with you with regards to the documentation changes, if that's branding or what's going to happen with the mascot, or if it's moving to Gitbook. So I definitely think we should try to sit down, me and you, and maybe also Sindre if he has time. So could I try to schedule a Zoom with you and Sindre? When is good? Like if you give me a time range, I can try to propose several days.
This week is better. I have guests coming to my house in the next few months, for the next few months. So this week would be best in the mornings for me.
That time zone?
Yes, I am, I think, 6 hours ahead of you guys. Actually, let's do it as early as you guys can.
Yeah.
So
I'm actually in Australia now, so I'm 9 hours ahead of Norway.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I am in Cambodia. I'm not sure. I think it's 6 hours ahead of Norway.
Yeah.
okay, cool. So you want to do it in the mornings, right? Early in the mornings.
It would be your morning. I mean, I prefer my morning.
Yes, your morning. Okay, good.
So that would be 6 hours ahead of you.
Yeah, I'll check all of
Or
the
Norway.
details.
Sorry.
I'll check the details later using some tool. And
Okay.
then, so Sindre, do you think you could work on the blog post draft and then let us get to review it before 2 weeks?
Are you talking about the benchmark blog post?
No, the Imba 2 blog post, like what you want to write about Imba 2, if you want to write it.
Probably not. I think it will still be a lot of work to just get it ready. So I don't think I will have time to start sketching the blog post itself.
Okay, then I'll strike that out. How do I strike out stuff in Chrome? No, in...
You could just delete it, couldn't you?
Yeah, I could. Yeah, let's do that then. I'll put it in a private note somewhere else. Let's see.
Yeah.
There. Okay, cool. So, yeah, then we have topics. So is there anything else we should follow up on, or can we wrap up?
I think we can wrap up.
Nice. Yeah, thanks for taking the time and have a great day. Bye.
Definitely. You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.